Around the time that Japan was completing the first of the new Mogami-class cruisers, a series of incidents were occurring in the Japanese Navy that was reshaping how Japanese ships were designed and constructed, and this ended up impacting the 5th and 6th ships of the Mogami class most significantly. On the 12th of March 1934, the IJN Tomozuru capsized in a storm, and this resulted in an investigation being carried out. On the 2nd of April 1934, the investigation concluded and the naval minister received its report. It had found that Tomozuru capsized due to a high metacentric height, which meant that the ship was top-heavy. The two factors that worked against Tomozuru on that day was the fact that its fuel was running low and the Japanese were not adding water into the ballast tanks to compensate for the loss of fuel, and the ship's superstructure and armament up top was too heavy, so as the ship's lower hull became lighter, the upper hull's extreme weight remained the same, and it resulted in the vessel capsizing. New stability calculations were formed as a result of the investigation, and existing warships, whether they were completed or not, were plugged into the new calculations, and it was found that ships since roughly the mid-1920s had been too top-heavy, and so the superstructures of many Japanese warships was reworked in the mid-1930s, though for the time period, the hulls largely remained unchanged. While the 4 cruisers of the Mogami class that had already been started would remain largely unchanged, the 2 that had yet to be started were cancelled for a major redesign. The selected names of Tone and Chikuma would carry over to the new redesign. This redesign would attempt to address 2 major problems Japan had noticed with its heavy cruisers over the previous decade. Of course, the first one was the new structural changes that needed to be implemented, and the second one had to do with gunnery dispersion. On the Myoko and Takao classes, there were 2 dispersion issues that were noticed. The first one was the significant distance between turrets 3 and 4 due to the superstructure being in the center of the ship. This could create a superstructure-wide dispersion gap in the shells when they landed on a target, and the position of turret 2 being elevated compared to turrets 1, 3, 4, and 5 also made a noticeable gap between its dispersion and the other 4 turrets. Mogami's gunnery arrangement would address the turret 2 issue by lowering it and then placing turret 3 slightly higher, though not as high as turret 2 on the previous 2 classes, and this slightly helped the dispersion issue, but due to having a gap between 3 and 4 because of the superstructure, that dispersion issue could not be addressed. So, the new design would result in all of the main battery turrets being focused on the forward end of the ship. The superstructure was also designed taking in the findings of the Tomozuru investigation, so the superstructure on Tone was significantly smaller compared to Mogami's upon completion, and due to the new gunnery arrangement, the superstructure was shifted further aft than on other Japanese cruisers, and during this time frame it was decided to delete the 5th turret, so the new class of cruisers would only have 4 turrets. During this time frame of the redesign, it was also decided to remain with 4 15.5cm triple turrets, rather than upgrading to 4 dual 20.3cm turrets. With the removal of a turret and all of its ammunition handling areas, the new class of cruisers was able to be shortened in length, so compared to the Mogami's 197 meters, the new ships would be 189 meters long. This reduction in length slightly threw off the favorable 1:10 beam-to-length ratio, so the new cruisers would have a slightly reduced beam. The Mogamis were 20.5 meters wide, the new cruisers would be 18.5 meters wide. All of this redesigning had left a huge section of deck available at the after end of the ship, and since the Japanese Navy was recently starting to place reconnaissance aircraft on their cruisers, it was decided that the after end of the Tone and Chikuma would be solely occupied by aviation facilities in order to increase the number of reconnaissance aircraft available in the fleet at any given time, with both ships being capable of carrying 6 planes. In the few years leading up to Tone's redesign, the Japanese Navy had started taking emphasis on increasing the habitability of their warships while also increasing the ease of maintenance, and with this redesign, Japanese were able to do both in the new cruisers with ease. As planned as the 5th and 6th ships of the Mogami class, the budget for these vessels was approved for the 1934 fiscal year, but the delay in redesign had allocated the fundings elsewhere, so Tone's fundings for 1934 were still met, and the ship was laid down on the 1st of December 1934. However, Chikuma had to be delayed until the next year, and it would not be laid down until the 1st of October 1935. Unfortunately, around the time Chikuma's keel was laid down, another major disaster occurred in the Japanese Navy, and this would result in more alterations to the Tone's design. On the 26th of September 1935, a week before Chikuma's keel was laid, 58 ships of the combined fleet were participating in fleet exercises when they encountered a typhoon. Roughly 20 Japanese warships were damaged during the storm, and 5 of these were capital ships, the aircraft carriers Hosho and Ryujo, along with the heavy cruisers Myoko, Mogami, and Mikuma. With regard to the Tone and Chikuma's construction, the 3 heavy cruisers damaged in the typhoon were the center of attention. Myoko was of fully riveted construction compared to Mogami and Mikuma, which had utilized electric welding in order to decrease their hull weight by roughly 15%. While rivet lines on Myoko had failed during the typhoon, the extent of the damage and failure was not as great as the electric welding aboard Mogami and Mikuma, and the deformation of Mogami and Mikuma's hull had far exceeded that of Myoko's. An investigation team had been assembled to examine what had become known as the Fourth Fleet Incident, and they would present their findings to the Naval General Staff in April of 1936. It was found that the alterations in the superstructures of the warships was still unsatisfactory for the metacentric height, and so some of the Japanese warships were still too top-heavy. But the major issues that were encountered during the typhoon was the structural integrity of the hulls of recent Japanese warships, mainly related to electric welding. The investigation committee regarded electric welding as satisfactory overall. However, when rough waves were encountered, as was seen during the typhoon, Japanese warships were perched atop the crest of waves, leaving significant portions of the hull unsupported. The weld lines were unable to contain the mass of the ship, and they would begin to separate, resulting in either the bow of a ship collapsing or significant portions of hulls cracking. It was recommended that major beam and bulkhead connections would utilize riveting and bolting, while the amidship shell plating would solely utilize riveting. The bow and sterns of the warships were still safe to use welding, however it was recommended to increase the thickness of the steel plating used. It was also recommended that framework be increased in the bow and stern of Japanese warships to prevent them from completely detaching during a storm. With these new construction methods having been approved by the Naval General Staff, Tone and Chikuma, which were initially supposed to utilize electric welding, would now see much of their hulls comprised of riveting. Now, I will address a slight issue with articles that I have seen regarding Chikuma as having been fully riveted. I have been unable to find primary sources that verify that claim. However, I am aware of the fact that Chikuma's construction started half a year before the investigation's findings were submitted, and this meant that during that time frame, Japanese ships were still utilizing electric welding. It's also been said that the increase of rivet count on Chikuma made its displacement greater when compared to Tone. However, both ships were registered at 13,320 tons, meaning that there was no displacement difference between the two, which further hurts that claim. This is one of those instances where photographs would prove invaluable, as there are several examples of Japanese cruisers where you can see their riveting lines. However, in the case of Tone and Chikuma, there are no close-up good photographs of either vessel, so it's impossible to rely on those to put an end to that claim or confirm it. While I remain on the fringe as to which side to fall on, I do lean more towards the ship having incorporated welding on its bow and stern, as was seen on practically every Japanese warship in that time frame. With the designers having altered the structure of the ship, and since Japan had politically fallen out with the West, it was decided at this time to finally upgrade the 15.5 centimeter guns to the 20.3 centimeter guns. With the new framework having been completed and the new armament selection having been made, construction would continue, and Tone would be launched on the 21st of November 1937 and commissioned on the 30th of November 1938, while Chikuma was launched on the 19th of March 1938 and completed on the 20th of May 1939. With the commissioning of Chikuma in 1939, the long line of Japanese heavy cruisers would officially come to an end, as Chikuma was the final one. With that having been said, there's nothing more to add to this topic for today, So, if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.